This is not about art history, but it is about art, kind of. It is about an artist, too, actually, and it's about history. I'm thinking of Richard, my ex-boyfriend. I met him while he was an art student at St. Martin's College in London, and I was at Oxford University. I'm thinking of the time he corrected my pronunciation, laughing at me. I was trying to impress him, telling him about my appreciation for Seurat. I mentioned the artist's use of pointillism, and Richard giggled, asking me to repeat what I said. When I did, he replied, "You mean pointillism?" Still snickering in disbelief over my ignorance. I'm thinking of this as I climb the steps of the Tate Gallery in London to see him again for the first time since he dumped me 6 months ago. He was my first honest-to-goodness real boyfriend. He was talented, funny, gorgeous. We could talk for hours on end. He was a depressive, but that didn't matter. The sunshine poured out of his every orifice to me. I liked the way he rolled his own cigarettes and made his own hummus. Everything seemed like an artistic endeavor. I was with a man, an artist, a moody Brit. Richard's lows were extremely low, but he was up when I was around him. We felt like a little family unit. I fed off of that. I made somebody feel happy, and that made me feel happy. He was the first man to tell me he loved me. I felt loved and needed, and that was so thrilling. I moved back to the States for my last year of college, and we carried on, made visits to each other. We looked into different programs I could apply to in London for graduate school. I was accepted into my top pick, and we were very excited about it. We were going to keep things going when I moved back to the UK in the fall. That plan was derailed when he broke up with me in the spring. Spring is for lovers, for finishing up with college, for looking to the future. I was just devastated. Friends and family kept asking me, "You're not still going to London, are you?" My pride took it as an insult. Of course I was still going. My grad school career didn't hinge on Richard. But the more people asked, the more I started to doubt myself. Maybe he had been my only reason. And then it crept in. Is there a chance we could get back together? Maybe he just needs to see me again. That was our problem. It had been too long since he had seen me. We had dated for almost 2 years, and to keep our relationship strong while long distance, we kept up with visits, regular letters, and phone calls. But the distance, I guess, just eventually got to be too much for him. Richard heard through my former housemates that I went ahead and moved to London, and he reached out to me not long after I arrived to meet up one day as friends, to catch up with each other. We would go see an exhibition of his favorite artist, Joseph Mallard William Turner. Turner painted in the 1800s. He was the painter of light. Not that bullshit guy, but a painter of real light. We see each other in the lobby. His jaw doesn't drop, and he doesn't start crying or spouting regrets over dumping me. He just waves as I approach him. I don't know what to do. I decide on a simple hug. He smells like Richard. I feel the urge to slide my hand up to the back of his neck and feel the swirls of his unkempt hairline, but I resist. "How have you been?" he asks, like I'm gonna answer that. Good, I say. I wish I could think of examples of accomplishments to back that up, but I can't. "And you?" "Oh, great." He tells me about recent pieces he's finished. What a motherfucker. There's a mythology of being with a creative artist, an idea that there will be an emotional, romantic, or psychological payoff, that you will either turn around or indulge together in problems. But there will be no payoff to immature artistry. That person won't be able to give, compromise, or truly love anyone or anything, just himself and his own problems. He loves the idea of being an artist more than actually being one. But still, we love them. We sit in front of Harpooned Whale on a wide, uncomfortable bench. Richard sits hunched over the way he always did. I used to find it adorable. It made it easy for me to run my hand along his curved spine and lean over him. But I can't lean now, and I look at him and I think he looks like a teenager. He fidgets with his hands. He looks boyish and unnatural without a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other. When he visited me in the States, I didn't have enough room in my refrigerator for all the beer he wanted on hand, so he bought a cooler to keep stocked in my living room. He sat on it, hunched, smoking, lifting himself up to grab a new beer from underneath. It's so easy to make excuses for the people we love. It's quite pretty, isn't it, despite the subject? He asks. I nod, and I look back at the painting and imagine him falling off the bench like he did off the cooler a few times when he got drunk. Richard was my first, my best, my only. At 21 years old, even though I had the awareness to know I would most likely fall in love again, I still hadn't been hit that hard before. When he dumped me, I was in the darkest of dark pits. My grades suffered, I stopped eating, I holed up in my room. What had gotten me through missing him while we were a couple was knowing I'd be with him, and then that was gone, so I had nothing. I was worried that I'd get to London and everything would remind me of him. What if I walk through Trafalgar Square and all I can think of is the time he picked me up and stood me on a bench and kissed me? He was so tall, he had to do that so we were the same height. The lion sculptures in the square roared open-mouthed with delight. The fountain spewed, celebrating our love and all its greatness, our kissing silhouettes backlit by the old streetlights, a tableau like a goddamn painting. We continue. Richard goes into another gallery room, and I stop to read a plaque. Shipwrecks and other disasters at sea were a recurrent theme in Romantic painting. Turner defines the essence of such an experience through overwhelming impressions of realism and horror. When Richard called to break up with me, it was one of our scheduled calls. We had them a couple times a week. We had to do it that way, before email, before Facebook. We went through the breakup discussion that I now know isn't worth it, but probably still indulge in more than I like to admit, of asking questions, heaving accusations, playing detective, all the things that just come down to a rejected person wanting to know why and never getting a satisfactory answer. I thought you loved me, I said. I do, he replied. I started to speak, but he spoke first. I did, but I don't love you anymore. I was silent. The breath caught. My stomach, my chest, my throat froze. We didn't have a real relationship anyway, he added. How could it have been anything real when we lived across the ocean from each other? When you add up the days we actually spent together, it was probably only a couple months. Richard had been sending me paintings, etchings, romantic letters, so many professions of enduring love. Artists are so fickle. We're looking at two self-portraits of Turner, one of him at 16 and one at 25. They're incredibly different. In 9 years' time, what kind of history happens for a person? When we look at photos of ourselves that were taken 9 years ago, especially one at 16 and one at 25, they're pretty different. But being able to paint a picture of yourself, that's a completely different matter. That's not just being able to take a selfie in flattering conditions. Turner presented himself however he wanted to, and no one in the future could ever say he was wrong. He was telling his story. And Richard has told the story of our relationship and breakup how he wants to. It was the distance. It wasn't real. I can tell it how I want to. What happened to us in 2 years? What would our self-portraits look like? I was visiting him once, and we went to a play in Covent Garden. He was withdrawn all night, barely said a word to me. I was so worried. I thought he was mad at me. I thought I had done something. Finally, when I pressed him on it, he confessed that what was troubling him was thinking about my leaving London and going back to the US soon. I was bowled over at the amount of love he had for me. What's occurring to me as we continue through the museum with my worrying and him not speaking is that there's nothing romantic about communication problems. His scarf brushes against my shoulder as we stand next to each other. I used to think it was so ugly. Today, I just want to cry into it. Richard is telling me something about Turner, but I can't hear. I don't care. He laughs, and I wonder if it was something that was supposed to be funny. He has this ridiculous impression of Michael Caine that he does, that I think all British people do, which exists solely of saying, "My name is Michael Caine." And even though it's so unoriginal, it makes me roll with laughter. Used to make me. And he wore that ugly scarf when we went on a trip to Scotland together, and we went for a walk in the countryside, and it was so beautiful. And our little rocky path that jumped over brooks was lit by the enormous moon, no artificial lights anywhere to be seen, and it was the most perfect moment of my life. And then he ran off from the path because he'd been drinking so much, and he ran up into the hills, and I heard him laughing and falling into bushes, and I wondered if this would be another time when I would have to try and heft his tall body up by myself and carry his annoying drunk motherfucking ass. The exhibit is both a perfect and a terrible place to meet. We don't have to talk. We have an excuse for not talking. I've been able to foster and feed my anxiety into the quaking, gnarling beast that it is, and I can go slay the lions in Trafalgar Square. As we leave, Richard lights a cigarette and asks me about my grad school program. We stand on the steps, the bright marble steps where all the sunshine seems to reflect back up on me like a spotlight, waiting to see how I answer. Will I do this right? I answer his questions politely. I don't think he expected me to come to London after he dumped me. Good. We don't make plans to do this again, but we do agree that this has been nice. It hasn't. We hug. It's light, it's loose. I feel his spine. I don't remember much that Richard told me about art, but I remember that it's subjective. A lot of it is about context, and you need perspective. I do still love Turner. Hell, I even still love Richard, somewhere way down. He's an artist. Thank you.
That's Jennifer Corley, ladies and gentlemen.